Hey there, and welcome back, Tired Soul. I'm your storyteller tonight, and I'm here to help you drift off into a deep, peaceful sleep. Before we get started, if you're enjoying your time here, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more bedtime stories. I'd love it if you'd drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you have a story you'd like to hear next, definitely let me know. The cold that clings. I was 34 years old, a regional insurance adjuster, when the call came that broke the long silence. My younger sister, Leah, had gone missing from her cabin near Hinton, just as the first deep freeze of November gripped the province. The police called it suspicious circumstances, but their search parties found nothing but boot prints that vanished at the edge of a frozen creek. I was the one who'd left Alberta for a decade, chasing corporate jobs in Vancouver while she'd stayed, becoming a wildlife photographer drawn to the brutal beauty of the backcountry. Guilt, cold, and heavy settled in my gut. I'd missed her last 3 calls. I boarded the first flight back. The Alberta that greeted me was a monochrome tomb. From the window of my rented 4x4, the world between Edmonton and Hinton was a study in frozen despair. Endless white fields under a leaden sky, ice fog clinging to the highway like ghostly breath, skeletal trees snapping in a wind that sounded like a low, constant scream. The temperature in Grande Prairie, where I stopped for gas, was minus 38 degrees Celsius without the wind chill. The air had a metallic sting that hurt my teeth. Heading up to the park? The attendant asked, his own breath a cloud around his bearded face as he scraped ice from my windshield. Hinton, I corrected. His eyes, peering from between a toque and a scarf, tightened. Yeah, I know. Rough time of year for it. Roads are brutal, bud. You doing all right there? I wasn't, but I just nodded, paid, and drove back into the white. Leah's cabin was a 20-minute skid down an unserviced road outside of town. A lonely A-frame surrounded by towering, snow-laden pines. The Hinton RCMP had done their sweep, but finding nothing, they'd moved on to other crises. The case was growing cold, literally and figuratively. I was alone with a set of her keys and a duffel bag of dread. The silence was the first horror, not peaceful, but oppressive. It was the silence of a muffled world, broken only by the sudden crack of a tree branch, succumbing to the weight of ice somewhere in the woods. A sound like a gunshot. The key turned in the stiff lock, and I pushed into the cold dark. Her home was neat. Too neat. A photographer's chaos of lenses and memory cards was ordered on the desk. Her laptop was gone, taken by police. But on the wall, a detailed map of the region was pinned, marked with her routes in red marker. One route, leading north towards the Athabasca River, and a place called Frostbite Lake, a local nickname I'd learned, was circled repeatedly, the pen nearly tearing the paper. That first night, the wind came alive. It wasn't a howl, but a pounding, a physical force slamming against the cabin walls, making the rafters groan. The power, fragile out here, flickered and died just after midnight. I huddled by the wood stove, the generator refusing to start, my breath clouding the beam of my flashlight. That's when I heard the other sound beneath the wind. A faint, rhythmic scratching, like frozen branches on the roof, but lower, closer, at the window. I swung the light, catching only the reflection of my own wide eyes and the thick, swirling ice fog pressing against the glass. The scratching stopped. The next morning, under a weak, colorless sun, I drove into Hinton proper. The town felt hollowed out by the cold. People moved quickly from vehicle to building, shoulders hunched, faces hidden. At the local diner, over coffee strong enough to stain the spoon, I asked about Frostbite Lake. The waitress, a woman my age with tired eyes and frost-nipped cheeks, paused. That's a mean piece of water. Freezes funny, gets these pressure ridges, caves in sometimes. Local kids dare each other to walk on it. Some don't come back. My sister was researching out there, I said, showing Leah's photo on my phone. Her expression closed off. "Yeah, I heard. Talk to old man Brewer. His place is on the access road. He sees everything. Or says he does." I found Harlan Brewer in a tar paper shack that seemed to grow from the snowdrifts, smoke struggling from its stovepipe. He answered my knock after a long minute, a wizened man in long johns and suspenders, eyes like chips of flint. The smell of kerosene and wet dog rolled out. "You're the brother," he stated, not asked. I nodded. He sighed, a cloud of vapor. "Come in then. Can't have you freezing on my step." Inside, he offered no coffee, just a hard chair. "Your sister," he said, staring into his own pot-bellied stove. Asking questions, not just about the lake, about the cold snaps, the particularly bad years. 1996, 1984, 1972. Years people went missing. Not just tourists, locals, good folks who knew the land, he muttered, almost to himself. "Some folks say it keeps 'em. That deep cold, the 40s that last for weeks, it preserves things. And sometimes when the ice fog gets so thick you can't see your hand, and the lake ice groans like a living thing. Things walk out of it, not as they were. Colder, hungry for the warmth they lost." He looked at me, his gaze unsettlingly direct. "She was asking about the patterns. The vanishings always happen in the worst frost, always near frozen water. She thought she could find proof." "Photograph it." "Photograph what?" My voice was a whisper. "The taken," he said simply. "The ones the winter claimed. They say they look almost normal, except their eyes are the color of lake ice and frost follows them like a shadow. They're drawn to heat, to life, to bring others into the long cold." It was the rambling of an isolated, half-frozen old man, but it rooted in my brain a seed of pure ice. That night back at the cabin, the silence was worse. I kept seeing Leah's circled map. I downloaded the local police scanner app on my spotty satellite internet. Around 2 a.m., a call crackled through. A reported prowler on Poplar Lane, on the south edge of Hinton. A woman said someone was standing in her yard, not moving, just staring at her house. She described a man in a thin jacket, no hat, in minus 35 degrees Celsius. "His face is wrong," she whispered over the radio, voice trembling. "And my bedroom window. It's frosting over on the inside." The next day, I drove to Frostbite Lake. The access road was a tunnel of snow between black spruce. The lake itself was a vast, snow-blown plain, ringed by ominous, jagged pressure ridges of blue ice. The wind whipped across it, scouring the surface into a blinding sheet. I crunched out 100 yards, the dry snow squealing under my boots, the cold searing my lungs. In the center, I saw a dark patch where the snow had blown clear, revealing the black, glassy ice beneath. And in that ice, suspended as if in amber, were shapes. Vague, humanoid shapes, several of them, trapped deep below the surface. My heart hammered. It was a trick of the light, frozen bubbles, logs. It had to be. I took out my phone, my fingers clumsy with cold, to take a picture. As I framed the shot, I saw a clearer shape nearer the surface. A face, pale and blurred, eyes open. A woman's face, her hair floating in a frozen halo. It was not Leah. It was someone else, preserved in the perfect cold. A scream caught in my throat. Then my phone buzzed. An alert. The Environment Canada warning for the region had escalated. A flash freeze was coming. Temperatures were predicted to plunge to minus 45 degrees Celsius by nightfall. The mother of all cold snaps. I fled back to the truck. The image of that face burned into my mind. I drove straight to the Hinton RCMP detachment. I spilled my story to a weary corporal, the lake, the shapes, Brewer's ravings. He listened patiently, then with growing pity. "Mr. Kincaid," he said, "my name is Ronan Kincaid. We've dredged that lake. We've sent divers down in every season. There are no bodies. What you saw were probably ice formations. The stress, the grief, it does things. What about the prowler call last night? The woman on Poplar Lane?" He sighed. "We checked. No footprints. Her window was frosted. Sure, it's minus 35 out. Her furnace is on the fritz. We're getting dozens of calls like it. Pipes bursting, cars not starting, people seeing things in the fog. It's the cold. It gets inside people's heads. Dejected, I returned to Leah's cabin as the last light died. The promised flash freeze arrived with a vengeance. The temperature dropped like a stone. The wind died, replaced by a still, profound cold that seemed to suck the sound from the world. The ice fog returned, thicker than ever, reducing the world outside the windows to a swirling, granular gray. I tried to start a fire, but the wood was damp, the kindling refusing to catch. A deep, penetrating chill began to seep into the cabin, past the walls, past my layers. My breath plumed thickly in the beam of my flashlight. That's when the knocking started. Not at the door. At the living room window. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Tap, tap, tap. I turned, my blood freezing solid in my veins. A figure stood outside in the fog. It was Leah. She wore the same red parka she'd texted me a picture in just weeks ago. Her face was pale, her dark hair dusted with crystals of ice. She stared at me, her expression blank. "Leah!" I choked out, lurching toward the window, and her lips didn't move, but I heard her voice not in my ears, but inside my head, a whisper carried on a frozen current. "Ronan, you came, it's so cold. Let me in." Joy and terror warred within me. She was alive, but something was horribly wrong. I fumbled with the window latch, my fingers numb. As my hand touched the lock, I saw it. I need the warmth. The frost. It was spiderwebbing across the inside of the glass, radiating from where she stood, crawling towards me with alarming speed, and her eyes. In the gloom, they weren't their warm brown. They were a pale, glacial blue, the color of deepest lake ice, utterly vacant. I stumbled back. This wasn't my sister. This was the thing Brewer warned about, the thing from the lake. Her head tilted, a slow, mechanical motion. The blankness in her eyes flickered with something like hurt. Then a deeper, hungrier cold. The knocking turned to a scraping. Her fingernails, black with frost, dragged down the glass. "You left me. You left me to the cold. Now you'll keep me company." The frost on the window thickened, forming intricate, vicious patterns. The temperature in the cabin plummeted. I could see my own breath freezing and falling, like tiny snowflakes to the floor. A film of ice crackled over the water glass on the table, the thing wearing Leah's face pressed closer, its features blurring slightly behind the ice, becoming less distinct, more like the face I'd seen in the lake. I grabbed the fireplace poker, my hand sticking to the metal, and backed toward the door to the small bedroom, the only interior room with no windows. I slammed the door and braced the poker under the knob, my body shaking uncontrollably, not just from fear, but from the invasive, soul-deep cold that was now filling the cabin. I could hear it moving out there, a slow, shuffling drag across the hardwood floor. The ceiling above me began to bloom with delicate, deadly frost flowers. My phone, on 1% battery, had no signal. The satellite phone was in the main room. I was trapped. The scratching started on the other side of the door, not frantic, but patient, relentless. A cold blue-white light began to seep under the doorframe, not the yellow of a flashlight, but the phosphorescent glow of deep ice. And then, a new sound joined the scratching. Voices, not one, but many, faint, frozen whispers layered over my sisters. Men, women, young, old. The chorus of the Taken, from 96, 84, 72, all the way back. They whispered of the deep freeze, of the long dark, of the welcoming, endless cold. No one comes for us. It's peaceful here. So quiet. Join us. Share the warmth. The door handle began to turn, slowly, fighting the brace. The wood of the door itself started to whiten, the grains swelling with rime. The cold was inside the room with me now. My tears froze on my cheeks. My breath came in ragged, painful gasps, each one a smaller cloud than the last. I could feel the heat leaching from my core, drawn out toward the thing on the other side of the door. A profound lethargy, a seductive promise of an end to the shaking, and the fear began to wrap around my mind. To just sleep. To just be still. To be cold. Forever. With the last of my failing warmth, I knew the terrible twisting truth. Leah hadn't just been investigating these disappearances. The pattern she'd found wasn't just a map of where people vanished. It was a map of a hunting ground, and in her quest to document it, to prove it, she had ventured out once too often in the killing cold. She hadn't just found the taken. She had become one of them, and now, with the worst cold in a generation locking the world away, they were coming out. Not just for me, but for the heat of the town, glowing in the distance. My sister had led them home. The scratching stopped. The door handle went still. The whispers faded. For a second, there was only the deafening silence of absolute zero. Then, with a gentle final sigh, the locked door simply froze shut, not jammed, sealed. A solid, seamless plate of hoarfrost welded it to the frame. The faint blue light under the door faded. The oppressive pressure lifted slightly, but the deep cold remained. And from outside, through the walls, I heard the soft, synchronized crunch of multiple pairs of feet moving through the dry snow away from the cabin, heading down the unserviced road, toward the distant, vulnerable lights of Hinton. I am alone in the dark and the perfect cold. My phone is dead. The satellite phone is in the other room, on the desk, next to the map she marked. The warmth is bleeding from me by the second, and I can do nothing but listen to the silence they left behind and wait for the freeze to claim me, or for them to return, my sister at their head, once the town's lights have all gone out. The end. The stillness at Devil's Elbow. I am a 42-year-old structural engineer, and my return to Alberta was not by choice, but by a debt of guilt. My father's sudden stroke in Peace River left him unable to manage his failing trucking depot in the nearby hamlet of Devil's Elbow. My sister, a lawyer in Toronto, could handle the paperwork, but someone had to be on the ground to secure the assets, to face the creditors and the silent, judging stares of a community I'd fled 15 years before. I came back to settle his affairs, to sell the decaying business and the land it sat on, and to exorcise once and for all the memories of a childhood spent in the long, oppressive shadow of the North. Devil's Elbow wasn't a town. It was a bend in a forgotten secondary highway north of High Level, a clutch of maybe 24 buildings huddled against the boreal forest like sheep before a wolf. My father's depot was at the northern tip, the last outpost before the road vanished into a tunnel of black spruce for 100 kilometers. I arrived in the heart of January, when the world isn't just cold, but finished. The temperature in Peace River was minus 41 degrees Celsius when I fueled up my rented SUV. The attendant, a kid with frost in his eyebrows, just shook his head as I signed the receipt. Heading north? Yeah, no. Heard the plows turn back at Keg River. Black ice and whiteouts. You doing all right there? I wasn't. The drive was a descent into a monochrome hell. The sky was the color of dirty sheet metal, pressing down on endless fields of snow, so dry it squealed like styrofoam under the tires. Ice fog, a spectral granular mist, swallowed stands of trees and telephone poles, leaving them as ghostly impressions before they vanished completely. My headlights reflected back at me, a blinding wall of swirling white. The only sounds were the moan of the wind, the constant crunch, crunch, crunch of my tires on the gritted ice, and the distant, cannon-like reports of lake ice cracking under the strain of the cold, a sound that vibrated through the chassis and up my spine. The depot was worse than I remembered, a large, rusted Quonset hut, a smaller office shack, and a fuel island shrouded in ice. The generator was dead, of course. The silence inside the office was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own breath, clouding thickly in the beam of my flashlight. The cold here was different. It wasn't just an absence of heat. It was a positive, predatory force. It leached through my insulated boots, made the metal of my flashlight sear my skin, and coated the inside of the windows with furrows of intricate, invasive frost. My first night, the wind died. That was the first wrong thing. In a northern winter, the wind is a constant. Its absence was deafening. I'd gotten the generator sputtering, powering a single space heater that fought a losing battle in the office. I was reviewing manifests by its pathetic glow when I noticed the second or wrong thing. The frost on the interior of the window wasn't random. It had formed in distinct vertical lines like bars. And outside, in the perfect, motionless dark, something moved. Not an animal. The movement was too slow, too deliberate. A tall, dark shape, standing at the edge of the tree line across the frozen yard. It was utterly still. Then it would be 10 feet closer, with no transition in between. A trick of the fog, my tired eyes. I shut the blinds. The next morning, under a sun that gave light but no warmth, I investigated the main hut. The heavy padlock was frozen shut. As I worked it with a hairdryer powered by the generator, an old Ford pickup crunched into the lot. A man, in his 70s, face a road map of wrinkles under a massive fur hat, stepped out. He introduced himself as Walter, a neighbor a few clicks down the road. He didn't offer a hand, just stared at me with eyes the color of the overcast sky. "Heard you was comin'. Jake's boy." His voice was gravel on ice. "Here to sell her off, then?" "Trying to," I said, gesturing at the lock. "Won't find much in there worth the trouble," Walter said. He looked past me, at the tree line. "Bad winter for it. Worse than usual." "Seems cold enough," I replied, trying for camaraderie. He spat, the saliva freezing before it hit the snow with a tink. "Ain't the cold, bud. It's the stillness. When the wind dies up here, things settle. Old things. Your dad knew. He kept the lights on. All the lights. Even when the rigs stopped coming." He left without another word, his truck disappearing into the ice fog. His words festered in my mind. I remembered my father's obsession with exterior lights, the massive floodlights that had illuminated the entire depot yard, running all night, every night, a colossal electricity bill he'd grumble about but never cut. The bulbs were all blown now, shattered. I drove the 5 kilometers to the only other business in Devil's Elbow, a derelict motel and diner called the Northern Light. The sign was broken, reading Nort Feed Hakekiet. Inside, it was marginally warmer. A woman named Arlene, with tired eyes and hands red from washing, served me bitter coffee. I asked about Walter, about my father. "Walter minds his own business, more than most," she said, her voice low. "Your dad. He was a good man. Knew the rules." "What rules?" She wiped the counter with a slow, deliberate motion. "Out here the dark isn't empty. When the deep cold comes and the air goes still, it's like the curtain gets thin. You see the shape of what's always behind it. The old trappers, the Dean elders, they had stories. Things that walk the lines between the trees when the world holds its breath. They're drawn to heat, to movement, to the living. Your dad's lights, they weren't for seeing. They were for being seen. A beacon. So whatever was out there in the trees, it knew this place was occupied. It was a courtesy, a warning. A warning to stay away? She met my eyes. A warning to be acknowledged. You don't ignore them. You show them you're here and they, mostly, let you be. It's the silence they take as an invitation. I drove back to the depot, my skin crawling. It was folklore, superstition born of isolation and brutal winters. But that night, as the temperature plunged again, and the generator coughed and died, plunging me into a blackness so complete I could feel it on my skin, the folklore became flesh. The stillness returned, heavier than before. The frantic thump of my heart was the loudest sound in the universe. I fumbled for a flashlight. Its beam cut the dark, shaking in my hand. I went to the window, peering through a gap in the blinds. They were in the yard, not one. 3 of them, tall, slender shapes, blacker than the surrounding night, as if they swallowed the feeble starlight. They stood in a triangle, perfectly motionless. Their outlines wavered, like a heat haze off asphalt, but in reverse, a cold haze. And where they stood, the ice fog didn't swirl. It settled into perfect geometric patterns on the snow, and the frozen gravel itself seemed to bleach whiter, cracking with new frost. I held my breath. Acknowledgement. Walter's words. Arlene's warning. I needed light. I needed to show them I was here. The breaker box was in the Quonset hut. To get there, I had to go outside, for 10 feet. My mind screamed at the impossibility. I pulled on every layer I had, my breath already a panicked cloud. I unbolted the office door, the metal screaming in the cold. The instant I stepped out, the air punched the heat from my lungs. It was a solid, minus 45 degrees Celsius wall. My eyelashes fused together with frost in seconds. I ran, my boots crunching obscenely loud in the utter silence. I didn't look at the figures. I felt their attention, a pressure like the deep cold itself, focused on my back. The padlock on the hut was still loose. I tore it free, yanked the door open and fell inside, slamming it shut. The interior was vast, dark, and smelled of diesel and old wood. My flashlight beam danced over the skeletons of trucks, piles of tires. I found the breaker box. The main switch was thrown. With a numb, prayerful hand, I flipped it. Nothing, of course. The generator was dead, but there was a secondary circuit, labeled in my father's handwriting. Lights, bank. A bank of old, deep cycle batteries. A failsafe. I followed a heavy gauge cable to a separate panel. With a sob of relief, I threw the switch. Outside, a chorus of deep, resonant thunks echoed through the night, followed by a low, growing hum. One by one, the depot's massive exterior floodlights flickered, sparked, and ignited. I rushed to a grimy window. The yard was bathed in a stark, white light. The figures were gone. The snow where they had stood was now a brilliant, blinding white, etched with those strange geometric frost patterns. I had done it. I had acknowledged them. I had shown the light. I allowed myself a shuddering breath, my body trembling with cold and released terror. I would wait for dawn, then drive to Peace River and never return. Let the lawyers handle it from afar. I turned from the window to go back to the relative safety of the office. And then I saw it. In the far corner of the Quonset hut, illuminated by the harsh light now streaming through the high windows, was my father's old office nook. And on the wall was a large, detailed map of the depot and the surrounding forest. It was covered in transparent overlays. One showed the placement of every floodlight. Their beams weren't pointed out to illuminate the yard. They were angled inward, intersecting at specific points within the depot perimeter. Another overlay showed dates, going back decades, with small notations in my father's script. Stillness lasted 6 hours. Patterns at tree line in red showed something new. A single small X marked a spot right in the center of the fuel island. A date was beside it, this week's date, and a notation. Battery bank failing. Cycle concludes. Receiver must be present. My blood turned to ice colder than the air outside. The lights weren't a beacon to ward things off. They were a fence, a delineation. My father wasn't just acknowledging them. He was coordinating. The depot wasn't a business. It was a node, a part of something. And the receiver? A new sound cut through the hum of the lights. A high, faint whistling, like wind through a deep crack but melodic. It came from outside. It was beautiful and utterly alien. Drawn by a horror deeper than fear, I returned to the window. The figures had returned. They stood just outside the circle of light at the edge of the forest, dozens of them now, and they were not looking at the depot. They were looking up. I followed their gaze. The ice fog had parted directly overhead, revealing a slice of black, star-punctured sky. And in that slice, something was moving. It was vast, a slow, swirling distortion of the stars themselves, a silent, celestial vortex, hovering directly above the lit depot yard. The whistling was emanating from it, harmonizing with the hum of the lights. The realization clicked with the finality of a tomb door, sealing. The lights weren't keeping something out. They were a signal fire, a beacon for them. My father's role, the receiver, was to maintain the beacon, to be the anchor point for this convergence, and I had just lit it for the first time in months. I had completed the cycle. The whistling melody shifted, becoming a tone of pure, resonant frequency. The light from the floodlights didn't just illuminate. It began to solidify, the beams turning into luminous, gelatinous pillars. The very air in the yard started to crystallize. I watched, helpless, as the cold ceased to be a condition and became a conscious, physical entity, dancing to the alien song. The figures at the tree line took a single, synchronized step forward into the light. Their forms didn't become clearer. They became less substantial, bleeding into the crystallizing air. They weren't invaders. They were celebrants, and this frozen, silent ritual had been waiting for its conductor. The overhead vortex pulsed. A beam of absolute blackness, colder than space, lanced down, intersecting with the confluence of the floodlights. It didn't hit the ground. It stopped at the spot marked with the X on my father's map. And it began to pull, not physically. The snow didn't stir, but I felt it in my bones, in my soul. It was drawing the stillness, the silence, the very essence of the deep cold into itself. And with it, it drew life. The generator's hum died mid-note. The remaining heat in the Quonset hut vanished, sucked away. My breath stopped clouding. The trembling in my limbs ceased, not from calm, but because the energy for it was being siphoned. This was the truth. The horror wasn't in being attacked. It was in being used. This place, my father's life's work, was a sacrificial altar. The receiver was the offering that powered the ritual, that maintained the balance these things required. He hadn't kept a monster at bay. He had fed it. And now, with his batteries failing, it had grown hungry. It had drawn me here to take his place. I am writing this by the last dregs of power in my phone, huddled in the office. The light outside is no longer light. It is a solid, frozen sculpture of brilliance. And the thing in the sky is drinking it. The cold is inside me now. I can feel it in my marrow, a deep, still peace that is utterly terrifying. I am not scared of dying. I am scared of becoming part of the stillness. I am scared that when the dawn comes, if it ever comes, I will still be here. Not dead, but still, a permanent fixture. The new keeper of the light. The next anchor in a chain of silence stretching back centuries, maintained by sons who don't understand the debts of their fathers. The whistling has become a single, sustained note. It sounds like my name. The beam of black cold is turning, slowly, searching the buildings. It knows the receiver is here. It's time to complete the circuit. The last thing I will feel is not pain, but the ultimate stillness. And the last thing I will see, through the frozen window, is the serene, silent dance of the things in the light. Finally satisfied, as I become a part of the long Albertan dark. The end. The Echoes of Longshadow Lake. I am a 38-year-old archivist, and I returned to Alberta because the past would not let me go. My mother's sudden passing in Fort McMurray left me not with grief, but with a mystery. A safety deposit box containing a single key and a deed to a derelict fishing lodge on Longshadow Lake, a place I'd never heard of, north of Slave Lake. My family never spoke of it. With my life in Ottawa already unraveling, a divorce, a career grown stale, I saw this obscure inheritance not as a burden, but as a purpose, a thing to fix, to justify my own stagnation. I packed my winter gear and drove north into the deepening freeze, a fool chasing a ghost. The journey was a lesson in absolute cold. Leaving Fort McMurray, the thermometer on my dashboard read -31 degrees Celsius. By the time I found the turnoff for Longshadow Lake, a gravel track winding through a labyrinth of black spruce, it was -44. The world was silent, preserved in ice. My tires crunched over dry, granular snow that sounded like breaking bones. Ice fog, thick and hallucinogenic, swam between the trees, turning them into gray, looming sentinels. The only breaks in the silence were the distant, thunderous groans of the lake ice adjusting, a sound that seemed to come from the earth's core. The lodge was a two-story log structure at the end of a forgotten lane, crouched on the shore of the vast, snow-blanketed lake. It looked less built and more frozen in place, Every window was a dark, frosted eye. A hand-painted sign, bleached and cracked, read, Longshadow Lodge, Guide, Silas. The key from the deposit box fit the heavy front door. Inside, the cold was even more profound. It was the cold of a tomb that had never known warmth. My breath plumed so thickly I could barely see my flashlight beam. Frost coated the interior of the windows in thick, woolly strata, and the old furniture sat under a shroud of crystalline rime. I got the ancient propane furnace to light with a sound like a deep, sick cough. It fought a futile war. I was setting up my camp cot in the main room when I first heard it. Not the wind, not the ice. A voice. Muffled, distant but clear. A man's voice, strained and desperate, saying, "Can't get the fire to take. Damn wood's all wet." I froze, my own breath held. The voice had come from the basement. The door to it was a black rectangle off the kitchen. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening. Nothing but the groan of the lodge timbers. I told myself it was the ice, the wind playing tricks. But the words had been too clear, too specific. The next morning, under a pale sun that did nothing to ease the cold, I investigated. The basement was a root cellar, dirt-floored, filled with broken furniture and jars of preserves that had exploded from the freeze. And on the far wall, a calendar, December 1987. The month of December was circled in red. The 18th was marked with an X. Today was December 18th. That afternoon, I snowshoed to the nearest sign of life, a clapboard house about a kilometer down the shore. An elderly man, introduced as Eli, answered after a long delay, peering at me from within a cloud of wood smoke. He didn't invite me in. "Longshadow Lodge, eh?" he said, his voice a dry rasp. "Yeah, no, been empty since Silas." Silas? The guide on the sign. Eli's eyes, pale and watery, looked past me to the frozen lake. "Silas Rem, best guide on the lake, till 87, bad winter, worse than this, went out checking his ice fishing lines, never came back. They found his sled, his gear, hole in the ice, never found him." He finally looked at me. "Your mother, she was his sister. Didn't know she had a kid. She left after that, never came back." "Why did she keep the lodge?" A shrug that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "Couldn't sell it. No one local would buy it. Place. It remembers." Back at the lodge, as the early darkness fell, the furnace sputtered and died. The propane tank was empty. I had a small generator, but it wouldn't start, the battery killed by the cold. Panic began as a chill in my gut that had nothing to do with the temperature. I was stranded in a freezing tomb with no way to call for help. I built a fire in the massive stone fireplace, my fingers clumsy and numb. The wood, stacked for decades under a tarp, was indeed damp. It smoked and hissed, giving little heat. As I struggled, the voices returned. Not just one, a chorus of them filtering up through the floorboards, seeping from the walls. "Ice is singing tonight. Sounds wrong. Eli says a storm's coming. A real one. Silas, you sure about that ridge? Looks unstable." They were snippets of conversation, layered, overlapping. All tense, all afraid. All from that same December. I lived their last day with them. The voices tracked the hours, the growing worry as Silas didn't return. The decision by the others, his friends, Eli among them, to venture out. Their shouts swallowed by the wind. Then, much later, the single, clear, final voice. Silas, not shouting, calm, resigned, and freezing, whispering into the roaring dark. I see it now. The long shadow, it's not from the trees. The moment he said it, every voice stopped. The lodge was silent except for my own shuddering breaths. The fire I'd fought so hard to start winked out, as if smothered. And the cold rushed in, not as an absence but as a presence. It had weight. It had intent. I ran to the window. Outside, the ice fog had coalesced into a solid wall of white. And in it, shadows moved. Tall, slender shapes walking with a slow, deliberate pace from the direction of the lake toward the lodge. They didn't crunch the snow. They left no prints. They left only a deeper cold in their wake, a trail of air so frigid it made the existing frost crackle and multiply. They were at the door, not knocking, just standing there. I could feel their stillness through the wood. The door handle began to frost over, the metal whining as it contracted. I did the only thing I could think of. I spoke, my voice cracking. "Silas, is that you?" The silence that followed was deeper than before. Then, from everywhere and nowhere, his voice replied, not through the floor but in my mind, carried on a wave of paralyzing cold. "We are all Silas now. The lake takes, the cold keeps, the shadow grows." The door did not open. The shadows simply seeped through it. They materialized in my main room, 3 figures composed of swirling ice fog and the absolute dark between stars. They had the rough shape of men, but their edges bled cold, and where they stood, the floorboards bloomed with instant, intricate frost. Their faces were shifting landscapes of frozen memories, glimpses of Silas, of the other men, of terror and final understanding. "You are kin." The voices chorused, a sound like breaking ice. "You opened the door, you lit the memory fire, now you complete the circle." "What circle?" I begged, backing away until the cold stone of the fireplace pressed into my spine. "The lodge is an anchor. It holds the memory of the moment of our transition. It calls to kin. Your mother left. She broke the line, but blood calls blood back. The long shadow needs a keeper." One of the figures drifted forward. As it neared, the cold became a physical pain, a scalding burn of absolute zero. My thoughts slowed. My memories, of Ottawa, of my mother, of my warm life, felt thin and distant, like someone else's story. "The shadow is not cast by the trees on the lake," Silas's voice explained. A hint of his old guiding patience still there, twisted by eternity. "It is cast by the lake on the world. This cold, it is alive. It is conscious, and it is hungry for time, for warmth, for stories. It caught us, it preserves us. We are its archivists." The figure extended a hand of swirling frost. I didn't want to, but the cold was inside me, compelling me. My hand rose. Our fingers did not touch. The cold from his form simply flowed into me, a river of frozen memory. I saw it all, not just Silas's death, but the deaths of others decades earlier, centuries perhaps. The lake's long, patient harvest during the worst winters. The lodge, built unwittingly on a thin spot, a place where the barrier between our world and the conscious cold was weak. My mother hadn't just lost a brother. She'd sensed the truth, the hungry intelligence in the deep freeze. She fled to save herself, and perhaps to save an unborn child. The influx stopped. I collapsed, gasping, my body on the verge of shutdown. The shadows watched. "Now you know. The keeper tends the memory. The memory sustains the shadow. You will stay. You will listen to the echoes. You will keep the fire of our story smoldering so the cold remains. Focused here. Contained." "Or what?" I whispered, my lips numb. "Or it grows bored. It seeks new stories. It walks into Slave Lake, into Fort McMurray, following the bloodlines of those who have touched this place. Your mother's line is long. Many cousins, many children. The cold is patient. It can wait for one of them. Or you can be the anchor, the final, willing archive." This was the true horror. Not a monster to fight, but a custodial nightmare. A supernatural containment protocol. The lodge wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was a psychic dam, and the ghosts were the dam's engineers condemned to maintain it. And they needed a new foreman. I have chosen to stay. The generator works now. The voices are quieter, just a background whisper in the logs. The figures are gone, but I feel them out on the lake, walking their eternal patrol. I keep a fire going. Sometimes I mark the calendar. New shadows moving in the ice fog along the shore. Not Silas. Newer, people who vanished from this lake in the winters of 1999 or 2014. The cold is always collecting. The archive grows, and my job is to catalog it, to hold it all in this lodge, so the long shadow doesn't stretch toward the distant, warm glow of a town or a city where my few remaining family members sleep, unknowing. I am the archivist of the Absolute Zero, the keeper of the long shadow. And when the next brutal winter comes, and a lost soul stumbles upon this lodge, drawn by blood or chance, I will be here. I will have to make the choice Silas made for me, to offer them the key, to pass on the duty, or to let the cold go looking for a new story, following the scent of their warmth all the way home. For end. The groom of the White Plain. I am a 39-year-old surveyor, and I returned to northern Alberta because the maps had run out. My father's dementia-fueled insistence that our family owed a debt of silence for something that happened near High Level during the winter of '79 forced me north. He could no longer articulate what, only that it involved a place called White Plain, a stretch of frozen muskeg northwest of town. With his care paid for, and my own career in Calgary stagnant, I came to settle the ghost, armed with GPS and skepticism, during the week of the year's deepest cold. It was a mistake written in frost. The cold was a physical entity. Landing in Fort McMurray at minus 38 degrees Celsius was just the preface. Driving north, the world whitened and flattened. Near High Level, the dashboard read minus 47. The air had a metallic, burning sting that seared the nostrils. Ice fog, a phantom made of frozen breath, swallowed the road for kilometers at a time, reducing the world to the 10 feet of brittle gravel in my headlights. The only sounds were the endless crunch, crunch, crunch of my tires on packed snow and the distant tectonic groans of the frozen Peace River, a reminder that the ground itself was in torment. I found the turnoff, a track so faint it was just a suggestion between walls of black spruce. My truck lurched through deepening drifts. The White Plain was exactly that. A vast, treeless expanse of snow-covered muskeg, a perfect blinding circle of nothing under a lead-gray sky. At its edge, a lone, leaning cabin. My father's coordinates ended here. The cabin was a tomb. The door was frozen shut. I had to pour boiling water from my thermos to break the seal. Inside, the cold was older, deeper. Frost furred every log, every nail. In the center of the single room, a small, heavy ledger sat on a table, open. The last entry, in shaky script, read, February 3rd. The groom is coming up the road. We will settle tonight. The date was from 40 years ago. The page was stained with something dark and frozen. That first night, the silence was the second horror. The wind died completely, an unnatural cessation. The only noise was the tick, tick, tick of the cabin's logs contracting in the deep freeze. I'd brought a satellite phone. It had full bars, but when I tried to call out, all I heard was a hollow, rushing static, like wind over a vast open plain. My GPS unit showed my location accurately, but the map around me was blank. A perfect white digital void. I was making tea on my camp stove when I heard the first voice. Not from outside, from the corner of the room where the shadows were thickest. A man's voice, raspy with cold and fear. You shouldn't have come on the settling week. I spun, my flashlight beam cutting empty air. Who's there? No answer. Just the static from the sat phone, a little louder. Then a woman's voice, younger, from near the window. It takes the loudest silence. It needs a witness. The voices were clear, desperate, and inside the cabin. I spent the night armed with a hatchet back to the wall, watching my breath cloud in the beam of my light. The voices came and went. Fragments of arguments. Pleas and resigned statements, all about the groom, the debt, and the settling. At dawn, desperate for context, I drove back to High Level. The gas station attendant, a woman with a face lined by decades of winter, flinched when I mentioned White Plain. That's not a place for this week, she said, not meeting my eyes as she took my money. Settling week. What does that mean? I pressed. She shook her head. Old trapper term. When the cold gets so deep and still, it settles, like flour in a sack. Everything sits where it falls, including things best left unstirred. Your truck's the only one been north today. Roads are brutal, bud. You doing all right there? I wasn't. I bought supplies and returned, a dread I couldn't name coiling in my gut. The second night, the voices were louder. They had names. Martin. Elise. They argued about a pact. About how their great-grandparents had been spared a blizzard in 1909, but at a cost. A tithe paid to the stillness itself. A life given willingly during the deepest cold of a generation to quiet the wind and fill the trails. The groom was not a person. It was the role, the one who stayed behind so others could leave. My father's ramblings about a debt of silence snapped into horrific focus. We weren't debtors. We were the guarantors. The cold in the cabin became sentient. It wasn't just air temperature. It was a pressing, attentive force. My camp stove flame guttered and died, though fuel remained. The battery on my powerful flashlight drained in minutes. The frost on the walls began to form patterns. Not random crystals, but intricate, repeating loops that looked like chains. I ran to my truck. It started. Then every electronic system died at once, plunging me into a silence so absolute it felt like going deaf. The headlights faded to orange, then black. Through the windshield, I saw them, figures, standing in a wide circle around the cabin, at the edge of the tree line. Dozens of them, silhouettes etched against the snow, motionless. They were dressed in period clothing, parkas from the 30s, 50s, 70s. They did not move. They just watched. The witnesses from every settling. Terror propelled me back into the cabin. As I slammed the door, the ledger on the table flipped open by itself. The frozen dark stain on the final page began to melt. Then flow, forming new words beneath the old entry. The debt is called. The line continues. Prepare the groom. The voices in the room coalesced into a single, mournful choir. It must be willing. It must be of the blood. The silence must be fed, or it will take the town. It will follow the bloodline south, from child to child, until the debt is paid. This was the true horror. Not a monster to fight, but a generational, supernatural debt. A sentient, a hungry stillness that demanded a sacrifice of consciousness every 40 or 50 years. During a cold so profound, it thinned the veil between states of being. The groom was the offering left to the quiet, a mind left behind to forever witness the emptiness, to satiate it. My father was supposed to be the groom in 1979. He fled. He broke the pact, and now the debt with interest had come for me. The cold wrapped around my mind. My panic didn't fade. It was smothered, packed in layers of insulating quiet. A profound, eerie calm descended. I understood. This was why I'd felt drawn here, why my career had stalled. The debt's pull. My own will began to feel like a distant, small thing. The cabin door blew open, no wind. It just swung inward. The circle of witnesses had closed in. They stood just outside, their features now clear in the starlight. Their eyes were not eyes, but pools of perfect black frost. They held no threat, only expectation. One, a man in a 1970s-era snowsuit, my father's age, stepped forward. His voice was the crackle of static. He ran. The silence grew hungry. It whispers now in the winds off the river. It dreams of the sounds of high level, of children's voices. It will go looking, unless it has fed a willing silence, a permanent listener. I knew then the twist, the final devastating truth. The sacrifice wasn't death. It was eternal observation. To become part of the stillness, conscious but immobile, forever watching the white plain. Your senses stretched thin, to absorb every second of nothingness, to feed the quiet, so it wouldn't hunt. The previous grooms weren't dead. They were the witnesses in the circle, and the voices in my cabin. They were the current groom, the one from 40 years ago, fractured and mad, whose tenure was over. I was the replacement. A choice. A lifetime of this conscious entropy or unleashing a sentient, predatory silence upon my family and countless others. The cold made the decision feel inevitable. It settled into my bones, my thoughts, slowing them to a glacial pace. I write this in the ledger with numb fingers. My father's name is listed with the other debtors. Mine is now at the bottom. I will walk out soon, to the center of the white plain. The witnesses will close their circle around me. The cold will complete its work. I will become the new stillness, the listener in the void, holding the line so the quiet doesn't spill south. And in 40 years, when the cold settles this deep again, my son, who will feel an unexplained pull to this place, will find this book, and he will read these final words, written in the frost of his father's dying mind, and understand the nature of his inheritance. The silence must be fed. The groom must be willing. I can hear it calling my name on the static now. It sounds like peace. It sounds like forever. The end. The ice that whispers. I am a 34-year-old paramedic, and I returned to Peace River because the screams in my head were quieter here. My partner Leo died in a multi-vehicle pileup on the Henday in Edmonton during a black ice event. I was driving. The official inquiry said it wasn't my fault. My mind disagreed. I came back to my hometown, taking a job with the local EMS, thinking the familiar, brutal winters would be a penance I understood. I was wrong. The cold here knows more than I ever could. It was the third week of January, a deep, cold snap that had settled over the town like a lead blanket. The temperature hadn't risen above minus 35 degrees Celsius for days. The air wasn't just cold. It was a metallic, biting force that stole your breath and made the inside of your nose feel like cracked porcelain. I was on the night shift, and the call came in just after 2 a.m. A report of a possible hypothermia case on the riverfront trail near the old boat launch. My partner that night, Janice, a local who'd been on the job for 20 years, just sighed as she pulled the ambulance onto the empty street. The tires crunched over the dry, packed snow. Riverfront, this weather, yeah, no. Probably a drifter from the shelter who wandered too far. Or kids being stupid. Ice fog hung in the still air, turning the streetlights into fuzzy, glowing orbs that illuminated nothing. We found him halfway down the trail, a dark lump against the endless white. He was in his 60s, dressed in a thin jacket, no gloves. His skin was waxy, his pulse thready, standard severe hypothermia. But as we loaded him onto the stretcher, his eyes fluttered open. They were wide with a terror that had nothing to do with the cold. He grabbed my wrist with a surprising, frozen strength. "The river," he whispered, his breath a ghostly cloud. It's not right. It's making copies." Janice gave me a tight look that said, "Delirium. Common in hypothermia." We secured him and started treatment, but his words stuck in my mind, freezing there. As we drove back, the ambulance humming around us, I stared out at the dark expanse of the frozen Peace River. The ice wasn't smooth. Pressure ridges had thrust up in jagged, blue-white lines, like the spine of some buried leviathan. And from deep below, I heard it, the deep, groaning crack of the ice shifting. It sounded like a voice. At the hospital, the man was registered as John Doe, no ID, standard procedure. I finished my shift as dawn bleached the sky a sickly gray. I couldn't sleep. The man's words echoed. Making copies. I drove back to the river, my personal truck groaning in the cold. The spot where we found him was marked only by our boot prints and stretcher drags in the snow. And something else. A second set of prints. Identical to the ones I'd made earlier, leading from the ambulance to the patient. But these ones? They led towards the river and vanished at the ice's edge. A local coffee shop provided the next piece. I was getting a terrible, scalding coffee, my hands shaking slightly. The barista, a young woman with frost-nipped cheeks, saw my uniform. "Rough night? Heard you guys got called to the river." I nodded. "Hypothermia case, older fellow." Her face paled. Not an older guy in a blue jacket." "Yeah. Old man Finn," she breathed. "He's a regular, comes in every morning. But he was in here this morning, at 6 a.m., acting strange, real quiet, and his hands, they were bright red, like he'd just come in from the cold." She looked at me, confusion and fear warring in her eyes. "But you said you picked him up at 2 a.m. My blood went colder than the air outside. "Maybe it was someone else." She shook her head. "It was Finn, but it wasn't. His eyes were wrong, flat, like river ice." The town, I learned over cautious questions, had a story. Not about ghosts, but about the river in the deepest cold. They called it the wintering. Old Dean stories, trapper legends. When the cold sits dead still for too long and the ice groans day and night. The river isn't just freezing water. It becomes a mirror, a hungry one. And sometimes, when it takes someone, through a crack, through foolishness, it doesn't just keep the body. It learns the shape of their heat, their memory, and then it sends a copy back. A thing made of cold and stolen memory, walking on land, hollowing out the life it finds to feed the stillness beneath the ice. The original is gone, consumed. The copy is a vessel for the river's slow, frigid consciousness. My investigative brain rejected it. But my paramedic brain, which had seen John Doe and heard the barista's story, couldn't. I went to Finn's registered address, a small bungalow. No answer. I peered through a window. The furniture was covered in a fine layer of frost. The kitchen tap was on, the water frozen in a solid stream. It looked abandoned for weeks. A domestic disturbance. The address was Finn's. We arrived to find a neighbor shivering on his porch. "It's Finn," he said, his voice trembling. "He's in there, but he's humming. And the cold coming from that house, but it's not right. My pipes are freezing from 20 feet away." Janice and I approached. The front door was slightly ajar, a rim of ice sealing it to the frame. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the wood, the same frequency as the groaning river ice. I pushed the door open. The cold inside was a physical blow. It was far colder than outside, a deep, sucking emptiness. Frost coated every surface in thick, woolly blankets. And in the center of the living room, sitting in a chair, was Finn. Or the thing wearing him. It turned its head. Its eyes were the pale blue of deep ice, reflective and empty. Frost grew in its hair, in its stubble. It opened its mouth, and the humming grew louder, forming a single, slurred word. Leaw. My partner's name, a name it couldn't know, a memory it shouldn't have. It stood, it moved with a jerky, stiff gait, like ice cracking. It wasn't hostile, it was curious. It reached a hand toward me. The air around its fingers shimmered with a wave of absolute zero. I felt the heat being pulled from my face. "Finn, you need to come with us," Janice said, her voice professional but strained, her hand on her radio. It looked at her and hummed again. This time the hum contained snippets of her voice, phrases she'd said in the ambulance earlier that night. It was learning, copying. The twist, the true horror dawned on me then. The river didn't just make copies of those it took. It used them to gather more. It sent them back as beacons, emitting that cold, that hum, that wrongness. They drew people in, concerned neighbors, friends, first responders, and when you got too close, the cold they radiated didn't just chill you. It simplified you, slowed your thoughts, your heart, making you an easier pattern to copy. The river was fishing. The copies were the lures. I backed toward the door, pulling Janice with me. "We need to leave, now." We quarantined the house. Called the RCMP. They found it empty, just a freezing cold home. They found Finn 2 days later, wandering near the boat launch. He was disoriented but physically fine. The official report cited dementia. I saw him once after that, standing on the riverbank, staring at the ice. He didn't shiver. His breath made no cloud. I know the truth. The river has fin. The thing in town is a vessel, an open channel for the cold, and it spoke Leo's name. It has a piece of me, a memory of my grief, pulled from the air around me that night. It's learning my pattern. Now every time I hear the ice groan, it sounds like my name. When the ice fog is thick, I see shapes moving down by the shore that look like people, but they don't move like people. They move like things, learning how. The cold isn't just weather here. It's a consciousness, a hungry, patient thing that uses our own memories as bait and our own bodies as its proxies. And once it has your pattern, it never lets go. It just waits for the cold to settle deep enough, for the silence to become absolute, so it can finish the copy and bring another piece of this world down into the long, dark winter beneath the ice. I came here for penance. I'm afraid I've just offered the river a new blueprint. The end. The Driftwood Mine. I am a 37-year-old former search and rescue operative, and I returned to the Grand Prairie region because the flat, frozen light of winter here matches the numbness inside me. A failed night rescue on Mount Rundle 2 years ago left 2 climbers dead, and my confidence in splinters. I came back to the family farm near the Wapiti River to help my aging father, telling myself the quiet would be healing. Instead, the long darkness and the relentless cold have begun whispering things the mountains never did. The call came on the tail end of a 4-day blizzard that had dumped over a meter of snow and plunged temperatures to minus 42 degrees Celsius. A neighbor, Old Man Driscoll, was frantic. His grandson, Liam, and 2 friends had gone snowmobiling up towards the old driftwood mine shafts in the hills and hadn't returned. The storm had cleared, leaving a world locked in crystalline silence and brutal cold. The RCMP were stretched thin with weather-related calls. My father looked at me across the kitchen table, the unspoken question hanging in the air with our breath clouds. "You still know how to track in this," he said. It wasn't a question. I suited up in my old gear. The metallic sting of the Arctic air hit me the second I stepped outside, a physical shock that made my eyes water and the moisture freeze on my lashes. The world was bleached white and blue. Ice fog clung to the river valley below, and the only sound was the deafening crunch of my boots on wind-scoured snow. I took my father's old Ski-Doo, the engine sounding obscenely loud in the stillness. I found the kids' trailers parked at a familiar trailhead. Their tracks, fresh before the storm, were now vague, filled in depressions leading into the dense spruce. I followed them, the forest closing in, the branches overhead heavy with snow that occasionally dropped with a soft whoomp. The trail wound uphill towards the old mining district. The driftwood wasn't a single mine, but a network of shallow shafts dug a century ago, mostly collapsed and forgotten. Locals knew to stay away. The ground was unstable, and the deep snow could hide open adits like frozen jaws. I found the first snowmobile abandoned, half buried in a drift. Then, a second. No sign of the third or the boys. My radio crackled with static. I tried to raise the RCMP. "Firm your location over," was all I got before it dissolved into a hiss like wind over ice. That's when I saw the footprints, 3 sets, leading away from the machines towards the black mouth of a mine entrance I didn't recognize. It wasn't boarded up. The timber frame was old but intact, and the snow around it was wrong. It wasn't drifted. It was sculpted, smooth, sweeping curves and sharp ridges as if shaped by a furious wind coming from inside the mountain, not outside. The air pouring from the entrance was even colder, carrying a smell of wet stone and something else, ozone, and a faint, cloying sweetness like frozen decay. "Liam," I shouted. My voice didn't echo. It was swallowed by the snow and the dark of the tunnel. I switched on my headlamp and went in. The tunnel was a slit in the world, the temperature dropping further with every step. My breath plumed thickly in the beam. The walls weren't rough rock. They were smooth, layered with rippling sheets of ice that glittered like crude glass. It was beautiful and deeply unnatural. No mine I'd ever seen looked like this. Deeper in, I found signs of the boys. A dropped glove, a candy wrapper, and then the first of the sounds. Not voices. Echoes of voices. Liam's laugh, caught and stretched into a distorted, tinkling sound, like ice chips falling. A snippet of conversation. Dare you to go further, repeating on a loop, each repetition slower, lower in pitch, until it was just a bass groan. The mine wasn't just a hole. It was recording, preserving. I found them in a wider chamber. The third snowmobile was there, tipped over. The boys, Liam, Mark, and Chris, were huddled together against a wall. They were alive, but their eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on the center of the room. They were shivering violently, their exposed skin waxy white. Frost coated their jackets, their hair. "Don't move," Liam whispered, his voice raspy. "It's listening." In the center of the chamber, rising from the floor, was a formation. It wasn't a stalagmite of ice. It was a grotesque, humanoid sculpture made of clear ice, snow, and embedded debris, twigs, stones, a piece of red cloth from a jacket. It had a roughly shaped head, shoulders, outstretched arms. And within the ice, visible like insects in amber, were older things. A tarnished brass button, a leather boot, a jawbone, the twist, the horror that unspooled in my gut. The driftwood mine wasn't haunted by a ghost. It was a processor. The deep, unnatural cold here, perhaps from a forgotten geothermal vent or something stranger, had a consciousness. A slow, glacial intelligence. It drew in the warmth of the living, lured them deep with curiosity or fear, and then it incorporated them. It took their heat, their sound, their memory, and used their physical form, or what remained, as material. It was building something, an eternal monument to the cold, made from the fragments of those who trespassed. The thing in the center wasn't a person. It was a collection, a decades-long project. The old-timers who vanished from the mines in the 40s. The foolish prospectors. And now, it had new material, the boys. As I watched, a tendril of hoarfrost, quick as a snake, spiraled out from the base of the formation and touched Chris's boot. The fabric instantly stiffened, white frost racing up his leg. He let out a choked sob. I had no weapon against the cold. I acted on instinct. I fired a road flare from my pack. The sudden, hissing, magnesium-bright light and intense heat filled the chamber. The ice sculpture didn't melt, but it recoiled. The frost tendril withdrew. The recorded sounds became a screech of feedback. "Run! Now!" I roared. The boys broke from their paralysis. We fled, stumbling back through the glassy tunnel. Behind us, the mine groaned. Not the rock, the cold itself. The air became a solid wall of freezing mist, trying to push us back, to fill our lungs with ice. The sweet decay smell was overpowering. We burst out into the blinding white world. I didn't stop until we were on the skidoo, the boys clinging to me and the sled. I drove like the devil was at our heels, which, in a way, it was. I kept checking the mirror, expecting to see a wave of crystalline frost flowing from the mine mouth. I saw nothing but stillness. We made it out. The boys were treated for severe hypothermia and shock. They told a confused story about getting lost and the cold playing tricks. I said nothing about the sculpture. What would I say? The RCMP did a perfunctory search, found the abandoned machines, and declared it a lucky rescue. They never went deep into that particular shaft. Ground's too unstable and the air's bad, the corporal told me later, sipping coffee in our kitchen. You did good, getting them out. Nasty place. Old Driscoll said his own grandpappy told him that mine didn't just produce coal, it produced stillness. I know the truth. I went back a week later, alone. The entrance was still there. The sculpted snow around it was even more pronounced, forming arches and sharp, petal-like shapes. I didn't go in, but I left a powerful hand warmer, activated, just inside the threshold. A little piece of concentrated heat. an offering. The mine isn't evil. It's just hungry and alive in a way we can't comprehend. It's a part of this winter, a concentrated node of the consuming, preserving cold. It doesn't want to kill. It wants to collect, to make the transitory warmth of life permanent in its frozen gallery. My father says I sleepwalk now. He finds me some nights standing at the window, looking north towards the hills, my breath fogging the glass. I'm not looking at the hills, I'm listening. Sometimes, on the absolute still nights, when the temperature plummets and the stars are viciously bright, I can hear it. A faint, crystalline hum on the edge of hearing, and in that hum, I swear I can make out new sounds, fragments of our shouts from that day, the whine of the Ski-Doo engine, being added to the collection. It has a piece of us now, a memory, and the winter here is long. It has all the time in the world to get more. The end. The exposure. I am a 41-year-old forensic photographer, and I returned to the Jasper area because light and shadow were the only things I could still trust. After the court case collapsed, my testimony about a crime scene detail dismissed, the accused walking free, my career in Edmonton crumbling from the stress, I retreated to the only place that felt neutral. My late uncle's remote cabin near the Athabasca River. He'd left it to me, a quiet place to develop. He'd joked. I intended to use the brutal winter silence to piece myself back together, using my camera to document the stark beauty, to find clarity in frozen landscapes. I found a different kind of development. The cold in the mountains in late January is a living thing. It's not an absence, it's a presence. The air at -39 degrees Celsius has a metallic, punishing sting that cracks lips and freezes nostril hairs with each breath. I'd go out at dawn, my boots crunching on snow so dry it squealed. The ice fog so thick it turned the world into a blurred, monochrome negative. I photographed the frozen river, its chaotic jumble of pressure ridges, like a battlefield. The silent, snow-laden spruce, the cabin itself, its roof bowed under the weight. The photos were technically perfect, clinically sharp, but when I reviewed them on my laptop in the cabin's dim warmth, they were wrong. It started subtly. In a shot of the river, a tall, thin shadow stood between two ice slabs where no tree could be. In a photo of the cabin from the tree line, a face, blurred and pale, peered from the single attic window, a window boarded shut from the inside. I wrote it off as pareidolia, the mind seeing patterns, a product of isolation, but the forensic part of my brain noted details. The shadow's proportions were consistent across shots. The face's position in the window changed. The real dread began with the self-portraits. I set up a timer shot of myself splitting wood, my breath pluming in the still air. In the image I was there, axe raised, but standing directly behind me, close enough to touch my shoulder, was a figure. It wore no winter gear. Its clothes were thin, dark, and from no recent decade. Its face was turned toward the camera, featureless save for two dark smudges for eyes. The snow around its bare feet was untouched. My blood turned to ice water. I ran outside, checking the pristine snow where I'd stood. Only my footprints. I took a dozen more rapid-fire shots of the empty yard. On the screen, the figure was in everyone. Sometimes closer, sometimes by the woods, but always present, always watching the camera. It was in the frame, a stowaway in my reality. Panic set in, the clean, cold kind. I drove into Jasper the next morning, the tires sliding on black ice. At a diner, over coffee that tasted of aluminum, I showed one of the less terrifying photos on my phone to a waitress my age. Ever see anything like that out by the old trail cabins? She glanced, then did a double take, her face hardening. She pushed the phone back. Where was this? My place, off the old fire road, near the bend in the Athabasca. She leaned in, her voice low. Yeah, no, you need to talk to Henry, he plows that road. He's at the garage, tell him Molly sent you. And Bud, you doing all right there? Her eyes were full of a pity that scared me more than the photo. Henry was a gnarled man in his 60s, smelling of diesel and cigarettes. He looked at the photo in silence for a full minute, the garage humming around us. "The winter exposure," he finally said, his voice gravelly. "What is it?" "Not an it, a they. Old story. Some say it's miners from a cave-in, trapped in the cold. Others say it's older. Things that were here before us, that the deep cold wakes up. They don't show up to the eye, but they show on film, on digital. They imprint on the light." He pointed a greasy finger at the figure. "He's not behind you. He's in the light that hit your sensor. And the more you look for them, the more they see you looking. The exposure works both ways." He told me to stop taking pictures, to cover my camera, to ignore them, and they might fade. I returned to the cabin, my mind reeling. But I was a photographer, a forensic analyst. Evidence was my religion. I couldn't not look. That night, a storm rolled in. The wind screamed like a living thing, pounding the cabin walls, shaking the roof. The power from the solar battery died, plunging me into darkness save for the guttering fire. I huddled near it, the cold seeping through the logs. I opened my laptop, its battery low, and scrolled through the day's photos in the dark room. A series I'd taken of the storm clouds gathering. In every shot, the figures were there. Not one, dozens. Standing in the trees, on the river ice surrounding the cabin. All featureless, all dressed in rags of different eras, all facing the lens. And in the last photo, the one I took just before coming inside, and the sky, they were all looking up. In the photo, it wasn't clouds. It was a vast, dark shape, a hole, deeper than the night, hanging directly over the cabin. A deafening crack echoed from the river, louder than any ice shift I'd heard. The cabin groaned. The fire snapped and died, not smothered, but extinguished, as if the heat was sucked straight out of it. The cold that rushed in was absolute. My breath froze in the air and fell as ice crystals. I fumbled for a flashlight. It flickered, died. That's when the light from the laptop screen became the only illumination. And on the screen, the final photo began to change. The figures in the image slowly turned their heads away from the sky, toward the foreground, toward the vantage point of the camera, toward me. The twist, the true horror detonated in my mind. Henry was wrong. They weren't just imprinted on the light. They were using it. The camera wasn't capturing them. It was a conduit, a focusing lens for their attention. Every photo I took was a beacon, a long exposure that gave them a clearer fix on my location, my warmth, my living presence in their frozen world. I hadn't been documenting a haunting. I'd been performing a ritual, summoning with every click of the shutter. The laptop screen flared a blinding, chemical white, the inverse of a photographic flash. In that searing after-image, I saw them in the room with me, not on the screen, in the cabin, standing motionless in the corners, by the door, around my chair. The cold radiating from them was a physical force, a vacuum, sucking all energy, all life, all time. They didn't move. They just exposed. The one nearest me raised a hand, not to touch me. It pointed a finger at my chest and then slowly turned that finger toward my camera on the table. I understood. The final requirement. The last exposure. Shaking, numb, I picked up my camera. My fingers stuck to the cold metal. I raised the viewfinder to my eye. I couldn't see them through it. Just the dark cabin. I turned the camera around, pointed it at my own face. I set the timer, a 10-second delay. The soft red light blinked in the darkness. I stood still, facing my own lens. I felt the cold concentrate, focusing through the camera's glass and electronics, drawn to the imminent flash. The figures in the room leaned forward, an audience awaiting the climax. The flash fired. It wasn't light. It was an explosion of anti-light, a burst of perfect consumptive cold. It didn't illuminate. It etched. I am writing this on my phone, the only device that still works. The cabin is warm again. The power is back. My camera sits on the table, its screen black, permanently dead. The photos on my laptop are gone, corrupted files. But I don't need them. I have the final exposure. When I look in the mirror now, my reflection is faint, washed out, like an old photograph left in the sun. But in the background of the reflection, in the room behind me, I can see them clearly. They're no longer in the cabin. They're in the silvering of the glass, the shadow just behind my shoulder. They are sharp, defined, permanent. And when the deep cold returns, when the ice fog settles thick enough, I feel an irresistible pull to go outside, to stand in the stillness, to pose. I am no longer just the photographer. I have become part of the exposure, a fixed point in their frozen landscape, a subject waiting for the next curious soul to point a lens into the winter dark and capture more than they intended. The cycle needs new light, and I am here to help them find it. The end.